fall happens. Okay, so in your explanation, we see sin entered and man fell. Okay, so now this is still in force as far as God's purpose, but now this has to come into play. Now things have to be fixed. Okay, and so now there's a whole plan of redemption is in force now. Now here again, did God know that man would sin? Did he know that man would need redeeming before the sin occurred? Yes. How do we know that? How is Jesus portrayed in the Bible? What is that verse that says about Jesus being a lamb slain from when?
Before the foundation of the world.
From the foundation of the world. Mm-hmm. So that was already, God already knew what he needed to do, what would happen and what he needed to do. So you're explaining to that fictitious person on the park bench there.
Like Forrest Gump?
Yeah, right. There you go. That's perfect. Perfect. I never thought of that. That's perfect. Yes, Forrest Gump.
Did you mention that the Bible's like a box of chocolates?
Yes, indeed. Right. Yeah. Pretty much in Ecclesiastes, it kind of made it sound that way, didn't it? Yeah. It happens to all people. All right. So, in order to make this happen, then the godly seed is what God was looking for. So, here in our illustration of the world, okay, this is not the millennium this time, okay, we have Adam and Eve, and they have fallen, okay, and then after they fell, of course, sin entered in, and sin just went rampant in the human race, okay, to the point where God had to revisit mankind, and in order to keep his plan moving forward, he said, you people really don't want, this whole idea here, and so I'm going to have to, remove you from the earth, but we have one family who was worthy to bring forward onto the new earth, or not the new earth, the renewed earth, okay? All right, so then after a while, so his three sons began to populate the earth, and now we're in the second phase of this worldwide situation of people all over the world now, and they're doing this again. They're doing this again. They've broken down again, and so it's not working for the second time. So God raises up another person. Abram. His name was Abram to start with, and so he looked at him and his situation, and he saw a faith resident in him, a faith that stood out because of his own surroundings, and his whole family were moon worshippers. Okay? And so, but he, in his heart, he had a yearning or a longing for the true God, and God saw that. And so God then said, look, instead of wiping everybody out again as I did with Noah, I've already promised I'm not going to do that, so that's not on the table. So I'm not going to wipe everybody out, or else out, but I can't work with them either. So what do? If you promise you're not going to wipe the slate clean again, you've only got, you're only able to work with what you got, and what you see is not working, what do? You promised you're not wiping them out, so what's the next step? Zero in on someone you can trust to get the job done. So that's what he did. That's exactly what he did. Okay, he just zeroed in on Abram. Okay, and so it wasn't working overall. So he said, I'm just going to grab a family, and I'm going to make a promise to that family based on his faith and through his seed. Okay, so the godly seed wasn't working worldwide. So we're going to start over with one family line, and we're going to create a godly seed through that one line. And we're going to keep a close watch on it and bring it along the way so it doesn't go crazy again. Okay? So we're going to nurture it and make promises to it and work very closely with his descendants, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Jacob's sons. And so he did work very closely with that family. Now, maybe this answers your question, now it becomes more hands-on. Now he has to basically take the wheel, okay, and work hands-on with this one family. Before it was like, okay, you know the rules, you're on the honor system. That wasn't working. So now he's hands-on, okay, with this family here. So that's how you explain this. Rachel, does that make sense? Okay? And so that's why Abraham is such an important figure in the Bible, because this is where God really began to take control and guide and steer the ship in a more direct fashion. Okay? So that's why his name is mentioned so prominently, and he's got such respect in both Old and New Testaments, okay? Because he's kind of a new anchor, okay? All right. So any questions so far as you're sitting on that bench?
Stupid is, stupid does.
Okay. There we go. All right. We're gonna stop. Ellie, we're gonna let you start reading then.
Okay, where'd she stop at?
God chose to take.
Second panel, yeah.
God chose to take one man and combined family and nation as interwoven institutions, both working to produce a godly seed. This man was Abraham. God chose to let Abraham become old as well as Sarah before giving them a promised son, so that they would understand this is all of God's doing, not theirs. God chose faith. God gave to Abraham many great and precious promises in the form of a covenant. It is an everlasting covenant. The law of covenant was added and taken out of the way. The Abrahamic being everlasting continues.
All right, let's stop there. So in his hands-on now with Abraham, he's injecting certain elements now. The new components are coming into the picture. He's unfolding. Remember that handkerchief I've always referenced? And if you open it completely up, it's got your initials monogrammed on it, okay? And so now you fold it up into a nice square, and you can't see maybe a little bit of that monogram. So you have to keep opening the folds. And so that's what God is doing now. He keeps opening the folds so the picture starts to get bigger. One of the elements or components was the introduction, once he had the kingdom people in place, once he had the nation of Israel in place, okay, now he has to give them a system, a law, okay? And so he knows where he's going with this, because he knows in the end run, in the very end of things, that in order for this plan to finally, follow itself out to the very end, he knows that he's going to have a law in place for a people. If the theocracy is the end goal, and it is it SY or CY?
Yeah,
See.
Is CY? Yeah, that looks better. So if God's rule over man is theocracy, a democracy of people, theocracy by God, theos is God. So if that's the goal, then it's still God dealing with man. Man still has to be governed. There still has to be laws in place. And so we're going to begin then where we're going to land at, which is yet out future, but we've got to begin that process. We've got to go back, and see where the handkerchief was tightly folded. And here it's completely unfolded. But here it's still folded in small pieces, so we're unfolding it. So now the introduction of a holy, righteous law. Okay? So God is going to introduce a law that he will also enforce here. Not the Mosaic law, but there will be laws. Okay? There will be patterns and such for them to follow. They had to start somewhere. Okay? He tried allow man to govern himself generally. Laws of humanity and, just in general terms, laws of love and kindness. That wasn't working, and it didn't work, okay? So he had to get tighter with the laws, bring them in tighter and have more structure to those laws, and show man specifically what he expected as far as their behavior. Okay, so you've got all these laws, these civil laws, these ceremonial laws, these spiritual laws, ceremonial, all that in force. Okay? So, but that isn't where he wanted to stay. That was just to kind of corral them and get everyone, get Israel on board as he's working through Abraham, through Isaac and Jacob and Israel. He's showing where he's going with this, through this next step. Okay? And so eventually he took that structure away, left the principles, but took away the external structure of it. Okay? Because really what he wants, if there's going to be any relationship at all, he really wants man to love him from the heart, not because the book says to, right? Okay, love me from your heart, okay? Love me for what I've done for you. And so, and then it'll be more success. So this was holding their feet to the fire. He says, but, you know, that's because they're made to, under the penalty of death in a lot of cases. So I can't just stay there. And so, so in this redemption process, then they needed to be redeemed even from this. Okay? So let's go to Galatians 4. This was probably one of our verses, but let's go to Galatians 4. And Noah, would you like to read 4, 1 through 5? 1 through 5.
Now I say that the heir, as long as he is a child, differeth nothing from a servant, though he be Lord of all. But is under tutors and governors until the time appointed of the Father. Even so we, when we were children, were in bondage under the elements of the world. But when the fullness of the time was come, God sent forth a Son, made of a woman, made under the law, to redeem them that were under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons.
Okay. Go ahead and read 6 too.
And because ye are sons, God hath set forth the Spirit of his Son into your hearts, crying, Abba, Father.
And 7.
Wherefore thou art no more a servant, but a son, and if a son, then heir of God through Christ.
Okay. So he wanted to bring them up from servant status. Okay. You might say he wanted to bring them from out in the field as a slave or a servant and bring them into the house as his own son. Okay. Right? You see movies that have that, Roots have that, where slaves were elevated to be house slaves and not field slaves. Okay?
Pastor,
Yes.
who was it that brought that message on the spirit of adoption that, I think it was at Spokane here 2 years ago, or 3.
I know Rick Howard has preached on it. Spirit of
There's
adoption.
somebody at,
You think it was Spokane?
yeah, it was at Spokane. I don't remember
I don't remember spirit of adoption.
who exactly.
Smith maybe?
That's what I was thinking.
Gary Smith, might
That's
have
what
been
I
him.
was
Might have been,
Uh,
yeah.
Might have been him, yeah. Yeah, really could have been any one of those brothers.
Yeah.
But so what we see here, is again, to redeem them out from underneath the burden and the penalty of this harsh law, okay? The law wasn't bad, but it did have some strong zip to it, okay? It did have some heat to it, okay? And so, he didn't want to land there forever. Okay, so he redeemed them out from it. But now if you redeem them from the law, you gotta have something take its place. And if your goal is, because with the law in place, they're under that watchful, overseeing eye, like a parent to a child, and the whole idea is for the child to mature and grow up, okay? So that the parent doesn't have to watchdog him all the time, okay? Unfortunately, it doesn't always work, but then, anyway, nonetheless, that was God's purpose, okay? So he removed the law, but something has to fill the vacuum, or they're just gonna go crazy again. Something has to hold their feet to the fire because they want it, not just because God wanted it for them, okay? So, he's now going to remove this. Something has to quickly fill that vacuum, okay? So that's what he's saying here. In verse 3 again, even so when we were children, when we were in that immature state, we were in bondage, we were held in bondage under the elements of the world, But when the fullness of the time was come, God sent forth his Son. So there was even a timing as to Jesus' first coming. Okay, there was a certain timing. Made of a woman, made under the law, of course, as a Jew, he's made under the law, to redeem them. Okay, he came to redeem them that were under the law, that we might receive something better. We might receive the adoption or the placement of a son brought into the house as an heir to the plantation owner. Okay? And so rather than just a slave. So that's what in verse 7 he says, wherefore thou art no more a servant, but a son. And then if a son, okay, that changes things. If a son, then an heir of God through Christ. Okay, big change. And so, again, he's moving toward this scenario where he will have these sons in place, okay, who, although weren't held down by the law, still served God because they loved him on their own. And in their own hearts, not because someone told them to, it was from their own heart that they could cry out, beloved Father. Right? Isn't that what he said in verse 6? And because you are sons, because that relationship, because of that newfound relationship, God's trusting you to the point of removing that law from you and saying, look, okay, you're on the honor system now. I'm going to treat you like adults. I'm going to treat you like responsible boys and girls, young men and women. And because you are sons, God has sent forth the Spirit of his Son into your hearts, crying, Abba, Father. Okay? Change the whole relationship up. Okay? Marlene, any questions on that? No questions?
No,
Okay, all right. Is it making sense to you?
it is.
Okay,
It
okay.
is.
So the law had a purpose, but he wasn't gonna let it just live there, camp out forever. He wasn't gonna bring that over here. Okay? Because, I mean, look how Israel responded while under the law. Look how they responded. They rebelled against it. And so that wasn't working. At some point, it has to come from within and not just be imposed upon. Okay, it has to enter into the person. You know, I love you enough to obey you and to please you without the rules and regulations. Okay, you've told me what the rules and regulations are. Check, got it. Okay, I don't need a list now, you know, pinned up on the wall or whatever. I got it here. Okay, as long as I know what pleases you and what doesn't, then I'm gonna go. I'll take it from there. Okay, and it'll be on my own initiative. Okay, that's the difference. Okay, all right. So as we go further in our understanding of the nutshell, the Bible in a nutshell, Allie, where'd you stop?
The seed of Abraham.
Okay.
This seed of Abraham was both physical and spiritual. The godly seed of Abraham was within the physical seed of Abraham, children of the flesh, not the same as children of God, though both from Abraham. Physical Israel became unfaithful and thus was sent into various captivities and finally set aside as the chosen vehicle of producing a godly seed. Behold, your house is left unto you desolate.
All right, let's stop right there. Look at those paragraphs. So Brother Rick is saying that this seed, once begun through Abraham, okay, it was a physical seed. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob's name was changed to Israel. So you've got the boys and girls involved. You've got the people involved. Okay? But within that community, within the nation of Israel, you had the obedient and disobedient. So really, they may all have the bloodline, but they didn't have the spiritual line, right? And that's what God was after. Even though they were under the law, he still wanted them to love him and serve him because of their hearts. He still wanted them. And so within that community, and you read the Old Testament, read the Old Testament, you'll see that there were those that were just love God and wanted to be faithful to him, and there were a whole bunch of them that didn't. Okay, it just broke down, and they started worshiping other gods. And so that is just replete in the Old Testament, where God just got so upset with them. So that's what Rick is saying. There's the physical seed, but then within that community, there was the spiritual seed that understood what was going on and appreciated the relationship and wanted the relationship with God. Okay? All right. Would you say that's the same in a church? I mean, what's the difference? Right? in a church, okay, we're a community too, okay, we're under contract as well, we're a covenant community, scriptural churches are, and in any given church, there's the descendants of our early forefathers, okay, so there's a lineage, but then within a community, there are those, who, want to obey from the heart. Even though we don't have this law and it's been lifted, still, we still struggle with the heart issues. And that's why, when it's all said and done, even the 2,000 years of the churches, and that history, he's going to pick out the individuals of every church, right? Pick out certain individuals out of every church who got it, who lived it, did the walk, did the talk, and he'll put them on the throne. How do I know that? Well, let's go over here to Revelation. And I think it's Revelation 3. Let me find out when we get there. Let's see here. I believe it's Sardis. Let's see. Where is it? Thou hast a few names. Which one is that? Here it is. Yep, it is Sardis. So look at Revelation 3, verse 1. Just start at verse 1. The church is Sardis. And unto the angel of the church of Sardis write, These things saith he that hath the 7 spirits of God and the 7 stars. I know thy works. He's talking to a church now. I know thy works, that thou hast a name, that thou livest, and art dead. Yeah. So interestingly, at this point, they were still regarded as a scriptural church. Okay, so they have a name that they live. He says, but thou art dead. Okay. Be watchful and strengthen the things which remain that are ready to die. So they were kind of teetering on their, life or death with the Lord. Okay. So the warning was to be watchful as a church and strengthen the things which remain that haven't died, but they are ready to die. For I have not found thy works perfect or complete before God. Okay? Remember, therefore, how thou hast received and heard, and hold fast, and repent. If therefore thou shalt not watch, I will come on thee as a thief, and thou shalt not know what hour I will come upon thee. Okay? Now, look at verse 4. Thou hast a few names, even in Sardis, which have not defiled their garments, and they shall walk with me in white, for they are worthy. Okay? So the walking in white will be here. Okay? And so you look at this church 2,000 years ago. And so the commandment and the warning was to get themselves right so that they would end up here. So God's goal, we know God's goal is here. Okay? That's why I like that verse that Noah read this morning in Ecclesiastes 9:8. Okay? Phil, can you put that again? I jotted that down, Ecclesiastes 9:8. Okay. So there's 2 seeds. There's the physical, yes, that have the potential promises. Then there's the specific, the smaller community, the smaller number within the larger number. Okay? And I've diagrammed this before like this. All saved. All saved. Anyone who's ever been saved by the blood of Christ. And then you've got New Testament churches, which by their lineage and their history and their founder Jesus Christ have the potential of walking with him in white. Right? Every scriptural church. But unfortunately, within those communities down through the centuries, you've got a smaller group. Even within that group, that will actually walk with Jesus in white. It just keeps getting smaller. And so, very large group, much smaller group, even smaller group. Okay? And that's why Jesus said that the way that is broad, many will find that way. The way that is narrow, he says, only a few will find that way. Okay? All right, Philip, what did that verse say?
Let your garments always be white, and let your head lack no oil.
Okay. Your garments always be white, and your head lack no oil. That speaks of an anointing. So may your garments always be white, and may you always walk as an anointed priest. Okay, may you not defile your anointing. Okay, that's what that means. Okay? All right. Any questions? Verse 5, just to follow that up. He that overcometh, the same shall be clothed in white raiment, and I will not blot out his name out of the book of life, but I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels. I do believe, as I've mentioned before, that the book of life is a registry of the kingdom. And within the registry of that book, there are those that are earmarked to walk with Christ. And if we fail on that note, that privilege is revoked, and our name, as it were, as far as that part of it, is blotted out. Okay? And so that's what we don't want to happen. All right, well, we didn't finish. The bus came. The bus came, sorry. But you do have these for yourself. Like I said, go ahead and distribute them. Get rid of them.